Good. All right. Well, we're going to move straight on with our next session. Ahead of us, we have a fascinating discussion on innovation in manufacturing, agriculture, digitalization. But before that, we're going to have the perspective of a speaker from the Roland Berger Institute in Germany. So David Bourne, I would like to invite you to come up and join us on the stage.
So, thanks a lot for the kind introduction, Alistair, and to everyone else, good afternoon. So, the slot right after lunch, that's a tough one, but I'll try to make it interesting. And we start with a little thought experiment. Imagine that you have a magic button. And by pressing that magic button, you ensure a bright future for your children or grandchildren. Would you be pushing that button? Well, of course you would, as would anyone else in the world. Regrettably, there is no magic button, but there are things we can do to ensure future prosperity. My goal today is to show why we need to foster innovation to stay competitive and ensure future prosperity. I will structure my argument along 3 steps. First of all, why we need innovation for prosperity. Second, why Europe is losing ground. And third, why and how we need to leverage technology, competition, and capital to foster innovation, competition, and a good future for ourselves and for our children. Okay, let's start with the first part and have a look at innovation. It seems like everyone is talking about innovation, and this is why. We basically see here on the x-axis a country's capability to innovate. And on the y-axis we see GDP per capita in that country. Technically speaking, you will say that innovative power is strongly correlated with economic output, a trend which, by the way, can also be at a small level observed here in the Western Balkans. In plain English, you would simply say innovation makes your life better. Better in terms of more education, better healthcare, higher quality of life. How does that work? It works because innovation is the main driver of productivity. Productivity, higher productivity, allows us to produce more with the same input. That might sound technical again, so let's look at an example. Take farming. By mid of last century, one farmer produced enough food for around 10 people. Today, a farmer produces enough food for 140 people. That's productivity growth. And all those people, all those resources that are free now can be put to other use. For example, inventing and building and developing autonomous tractors to further increase productivity in farming. Which brings me to my second argument. When it comes to productivity, Europe is losing ground. Let's have first a look at some absolute numbers. We here see a standard measure of productivity. It's labor productivity. It's the output per hour worked. There are basically 3 observations which you should keep in mind when looking at that chart. The first one, only Germany and France can somehow compete with the US, who is leading when it comes to productivity. Second, the states in the Western Balkans are a bit far off behind the US, but they are doing some catching up. It will take them quite some time to close the gap, but at least just take Albania increased productivity by 80% over quite some years. So are things okay with the big economies almost on level with the US and the smaller ones catching up? Not quite. And this is when we take a look at the bigger picture, a longer time frame. We see here until 1995, European companies have been increasing their productivity faster than their counterparts in the US. But since 1995, productivity growth in Europe overall, with all the big economies, is much, much slower than in the US, which means the productivity gap has been widening since almost 30 years, which is a big problem for two reasons. The first one, Europe is becoming less competitive in a world that is becoming more hostile and is erecting more trade barriers. It will be much harder to generate more economic output under these conditions. And second, Europe is aging. Our labor force is shrinking. Raising productivity helps you mitigate that problem. But with our slow productivity growth, we're exacerbating the problem. And what's the reason for that? Why is that gap emerging? The main reason is that European companies failed to reap the full potential and benefit of digital technologies. The European central banks even speaks of Europe's lost IT revolution. And we have lost this revolution for three reasons. First of all, we lack human capital or digital skills. Second, we lack competition. Too few new companies that enter the market and too many old companies who stay in the market. And third, we lack capital to grow new companies that are more productive. The good thing is, there is no reason that these trends must continue as they have for the past 30 years. Because there are things we can and should do to boost productivity, innovation, and growth. How does it work? First, we need more competition by cutting red tape at the local, federal, and European level. Second, we need to boost capital to grow new productive companies, and for that we need a deeper and more unified capital market across Europe. And finally, human capital, digital skills. This is less about politics, but this is about every one of us. Are we in our daily lives making sure to put technology to its best use, to leverage data and software to generate more output with less input? This is the task that lies ahead of us. Remember, there is no magic button. Building a better future is on us. But I'm quite sure that we will be able to succeed. Because if the path ahead of us is clear, what shall stop us? Thanks a lot for your attention.
We have time for a quick question. First of all, I'm very disappointed there isn't a magic button. I was hoping that you were going to come and tell us there was one and tell us what it is, but that's not the case. Productivity is a fascinating concept, and you can trace back productivity numbers all the way to ancient Greece and beyond. But I'm interested in waves of productivity and how the introduction of new technologies can suddenly open the door to a new wave, a new route to increasing productivity. And of course, we are now beyond the cusp of the introduction of artificial intelligence, a decisive moment with the introduction of large language models, not just what they can do now, but where they're headed, and it's all changing so quickly. So what I wanted to ask you is, for a place like Kosovo, the Western Balkans, does digital technology and these new techniques in the digital arena, do they, not a magic button perhaps, but do they offer an opportunity for accelerated catch-up in productivity?
Yes, they definitely do. And there's a clear reason why I'm also rather optimistic that they will be applied. Because you mentioned the long perspective, and if you look back historically, which really improved productivity was when suddenly you had a lack of labor. For example, after the plague, or when England started wars with the French, suddenly they had a lack of workers who could take care of the corn and the grain. And suddenly in those villages where most men joined the Navy, they were the first to introduce machines to do that. And we are seeing a similar situation in Europe overall and in the Western Balkans. We are seeing a shrinking labor force, and that will put up pressure. And pressure usually is strong motivation to change something. So I'm optimistic.
Excellent. Well, that's great. That's a positive note, I think. David, thank you very much for your intervention. We'd all like to give David a round of applause.